Now, a seasoned Israeli diplomat and former Israeli ambassador to Ethiopia, Avi Granot served as foreign relations and political advisor to the Israeli president, deputy director general at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and head of the Africa division, and Ethiopian ambassador to Israel, Ambassador Alamu served as deputy chief of mission at the Embassy of Ethiopia in Washington, D.C., with the rank of a minister. He also served as Director General for International Legal Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Both of these distinguished individuals are my guests today, ladies and gentlemen, in this edition of Addis Dialogue. With it, I'm Shifara Olago and Justerias. Ambassador Avi and Ambassador Rata, thank you so much, both of you, for joining me and for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a delight to be here.
Thank you, Shifara.
Absolutely. Since now both of you served as ambassadors of your respective nations, let me start off by asking your views on the bilateral ties between Ethiopia and Israel as we speak, and also, of course, the cooperation of the two sisterly nations in various sectors. Let me start with Ambassador Avi.
Thank you. I think that since my term in Addis Ababa over 30 years ago, things have been really improving immensely. I think that the relationship between the two countries are continuously on the development side, both political. There is a great understanding of Ethiopia and what it does and what it needs, as well as economic ties. I think economically the potential is enormous, and we see already the great development in that field in various means and various ways. I think that since my days in Addis Ababa, when one would not be able to travel directly between the two countries, now that the Ethiopian Airlines is flying continuously, that has been really a great enhancement of both our relationship, both political as well as economic.
Okay. Ambassador Ratam, how do you assess the relations between the two countries and the potential for economic cooperation between Ethiopia and Israel as we speak?
Thank you. Ethiopia and Israel have unique historical and spiritual connections. You know, it is the relations of the two people that dates back to biblical times has given, you know, treasured heritages for both. And we in Ethiopia still recite the historical visit of the Queen of Sheba to, you know, King Solomon, whose wisdom she praised. And Ethiopia is the home of three Abrahamic faiths: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And we continue to share religious values, cultures, and traditions. Ethiopia is one of the first African countries to establish official diplomatic relations with the State of Israel. And Ethiopia had a consulate general in Jerusalem, but that was operational for some time. And then 31 years ago, Ethiopia opened the embassy in Tel Aviv, and the two nations enjoy excellent bilateral relations. You know, the high-level visits, the diplomatic relations are amazing. We have celebrated the 30th anniversary of the embassy last year within the context of the 3,000 years of friendship. And in that context, you know, a couple of years ago, His Excellency, Dr. Abiy Ahmed, Prime Minister of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, had an official visit into the State of Israel. And during that time, we have also signed, you know, an MOU to focus on the strategic partnership on the economic arena. And there are huge potentials on both sides to make these potentials in the area of investment, trade, and tourism, and technology transfer. We are working to enhance the bilateral relations especially in the economic sector. You know, Israeli investors have been engaged in Ethiopia in agriculture, manufacturing, real estate, hospitality businesses, you know, creating job opportunities for many of our citizens. And the reports show that also Israeli trade to Ethiopia has been increasing at an annual rate of 9%. The export potential has shown that, especially in the case of sesame and others, over 300 million US dollars per year. And we are glad that Israel is #1 importer of sesame in the past 2 years. And the Ethiopian Airlines continued its regular flights, as Ambassador Avi indicated, 7 days a week, usually even during the pandemic. In order to advance these long-standing relations, we have also here historical ties, especially in the connection of the Base Israel community. Yeah. As you know, these are the living bridges between the two countries, and it's an opportunity that we have a huge opportunity to enhance the tourism between the two countries.
Now turning our attention to current issues in Ethiopia, Ambassador Avi, the Ethiopian government, as you know, was forced to fight back the terrorist attack against TPLF forces when they had treacherously attacked the northern command of the Ethiopian National Defense Force. I'm sure you've been following developments in Ethiopia. You also spoke about the law enforcement operation last year. So can you share with us your reactions about these acts of brutality, if you will, and how the international community should handle such matters?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I think that the difficulty is the approach of the international community actually disregarding the reality. The reality is that the integration of Ethiopia is a paramount importance for the government of Addis Ababa, elected democratically under the leadership, very clear leadership of the Prime Minister, and any attempt by any groupings of any denominations to try and shatter that democratically elected government and the unity of the country for its own interests is completely unacceptable, stands against all rules and regulations, stands against all international standards. And I have to tell you honestly that I am a bit surprised by the approach of the United States, by European countries, negating the right of the democratically elected government to rule its country, to rule its citizen, and to ensure the integration, complete integration of Ethiopia. Ethiopia is composed of different segments. Ethiopia is composed of different tribes. Ethiopia is composed of different states, but at the same time, its integration is paramount, is most important. So in that sense, I think that there is a naive approach. We have in the Middle East also been a victim of a very naive approach by many of the European countries, wanting to tell us what is right for us, wanting to share their views, their opinions on us. That has been historically unaccepted. Even in the United States, I have to say that very often its involvement, its participation has not been as helpful as one would have expected, in spite of the great friendship between us and the United States. There is a naive approach, there is a misunderstanding of what really is expected of a democratically elected government in a democratic country. And that, I think, is quite upsetting.
Indeed. Thank you, Ambassador. Now, after the successful conclusion of the law enforcement operation, the Ethiopian army, as you know, withdrew from the region and the government declared a unilateral ceasefire. Yet, some Western governments have been trying to tarnish the image of the Ethiopian Defense Force efforts to restore law and order. They were also giving this fight against terrorism various names, ranging from civil war to all types of ascriptions. So what are some of your observations in this regard, Ambassador Rata?
Well, but it is important to note that, Ethiopia is an anchor state in the peace and security in the Horn of Africa. The government has been working with all partners to combat, different acts of terror, and Ethiopia will continue to fight against terrorism. The brutal acts committed by TPLF forces and the manner in which these acts are committed clearly indicate that these acts are terrorist attacks. Now, some of the Western governments are silent about atrocities.
Yeah.
Such kind of heinous crimes are shocking to the conscience of all human beings. What we hear is that, the type of killing, murderous acts, civilians, and act of gang rape, and all other atrocious acts are, so disturbing. These acts of terror against civilians, against women and children in Afar, in Amhara region, are testaments of the brutality of the TPLF. And, they have been destroying health centers, schools, public institutions, banks, hotels, and airports in Amhara and Afar region. These acts clearly demonstrate that TPLF forces are bent on destruction. And in this context, it is important that, the type of offenses committed under the category of these acts fall within the category of the definition of terrorism. And it's all known that, in the legal terms, in many of the laws adopted by, nations and at domestic level and international conventions clearly show that, these are acts of terror. And when we say, what is an act of terror, it's clear that when certain forces use violence and intimidation, especially against civilians, to force government to some acts in the pursuit of their political aims, this is terrorism. It's a clear term. And, TPLF has committed grave crimes that pose serious threat to the life, safety, and property of the public at large, and that are, intended to advance, their political cause, and which in one or the other way have been inflicting terror on the public, and this should be condemned. The Western countries, some of the Western countries who are silent about this should come out and condemn all these acts. Last year, as you may recall, the United Nations Human Rights Commission, in collaboration with the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, have conducted, joint studies, investigations in Tigray, and such investigations should continue also in what happened in Afar, in the Amhara region, and those who are responsible for this acts should be held, accountable.
Okay.
If I may, I would
Please
like,
go ahead.
if I may.
Okay.
Thank you. I would like to make a point of principle. I understand the need and the desire for condemnation. Condemnation means very little, because condemnations by different countries does not mean that they actually are going to change their views, their policies vis-a-vis Addis Ababa. And my point is that, in the Middle East, we have been victims of condemnations on left and right, and the Hamas is condemned, and the Hezbollah is condemned, and ISIS have been condemned. It has not changed at all the actually views and policies. What I expect of the United States foremost, but also of the European countries, to realize that we are dealing with a democratic country. We are dealing with a prime minister that has done tremendous efforts to build the bridges with Eritrea after a long-standing struggle. He has received the Nobel Prize for that. His view is basically, I want to keep united Ethiopia, I want to keep an integrated country, and any element, 5% of the population is not going to change my country. The ETPLF basically covers about 5% of the total population. No, we are not going to permit, in spite of the arms, in spite of the terrorist acts, we are not going to permit those elements to actually create a continual crisis in my country. We are going to stop them. We are not going to permit them. That is a message. It has to be a clear message. And I expect the allies, the great allies of Ethiopia, United States, and the European countries, as well as the African continent, to support that clear demand of a complete integration of that society.
Okay. Also, Ambassador Avi, as indicated earlier, Ethiopia is anchored to the peace and security in the Horn of Africa. The government has been working with all partners to combat acts of terrorism. So how can Israel help in the fight against the terrorist groups such as TPLF and Sheni?
I think that the most important act for Israel is to voice its continual support for the efforts of Ethiopia and its government. You are right in pointing out that Ethiopia has been really, like Ambassador Retta has said, the anchor of peace in the whole region, in the Horn of Africa, and not only in the Horn of Africa. It has been engaged with Sudan. It has been engaged with South Sudan. It has tried to promote peace in the whole region. It has been active throughout the African continent. So I think that we in Israel should do every possible effort to strengthen the country, to strengthen its position vis-a-vis the world, to make sure that it is better understood, whether it is in the United States administration, whether it is in European governments, whether it is in the media, and the fact that there are people, bad people, who actually challenge those rights of Ethiopia should absolutely in no way prevent us from strengthening our bond with the country and making sure that the country is going ahead with its plans, both when it comes to economic, when it comes to tourism, as well as when it comes to enhancing peace and security throughout the whole region.
Now, Ambassador, that as you know, Ethiopia has had to deal with many issues in the past 2 years and remained so strong in spite of the pressures. How do you evaluate Ethiopia's reactions to the pressures? And what are some of your reflections with regard to the clear violations of standard diplomatic practices aimed at undermining the age-long capability of solving its own problems by itself?
Thank you for that question. You know, we've seen that Ethiopia is resilient. This resilience, you know, comes from our own internal strengths. Ethiopia is an ancient nation that's known as a home of early human civilizations. And, you know, history is a testament to the values of our people handling our own matters in our own wisdom. And Ethiopia prevailed over the challenges in the past and will continue to be victorious in the coming times. You know, Ethiopians are, you know, religious and peace-loving people. Our people have from all walks of life and from all religious background have strong faith and deep faith on their creator that God will bestow peace upon Ethiopia as a whole. In that context, we have the courage, we have the vision to resolve our own problems in our own way. Last year, apart from the law enforcement operation, there have been, pressures regarding the negotiation on GERD and, the second filling. And there have been also incursions by Sudanese forces in the Ethiopian territory. We have had also, been working to finalize the sixth national election and so on. In that, Ethiopia has been under pressure on all this, and we were able to overcome, all this with strong will. And the government, under the leadership of His Excellency Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, and the people of Ethiopia have shown that we can prevail. The Council of Ministers recently has passed a decision on the draft proclamation to establish the Ethiopian National Consultation Commission. It's to be recalled that one of the national issues that the government has promised during the election is that to create this national consensus and national issues through an inclusive national consultation and discussions. And the council has referred this proposed draft law to the House for approval. Hence, the government has embarked on the right path to implement this approach of resolving the problem at the domestic level. There are, with regard to pressures from the outside, we have always to see that there are principles of international law, such as the principle of non-intervention in the domestic affairs of a sovereign state. And this is a cardinal principle of international law enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations. In that context, the principle of non-intervention in the internal affairs of states signify that any state should not interfere or dictate in the internal affairs of that state. And the provision of interference emanates from the right of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence. There are practical applications of these principles, even in the decisions of international judicial bodies. And we have the conviction that Ethiopia can handle its own matters in an efficient and effective way. Ethiopia has, strong diplomatic presence and can be heard at the African level. Ethiopia is a big country, big in terms of its demographic size, big in terms of its economic power, and big in terms of its military capabilities. And Ethiopia has, been helping all other African countries in the peacekeeping processes and all other actions. So it is always important to keep in mind that Ethiopia can handle its own matters effectively.
And Ambassador Avi, since you were also posted both in the US and served as the Israeli ambassador to Ethiopia, what are some of your observations with regard to the current US administration's misguided and biased policy toward Ethiopia? Also, Ambassador Avi, in your view, how capable is Ethiopia to solve its internal problems without foreign powers?
I will start with your permission with the end of your question. I think that Ethiopia is very, very well groomed to deal with its own issues, with its own problems, as it has been done in the past. I think its recent histories since the downfall of the Derg has proven how capable they are in running a country, how capable they are in the development of a country, eventually signing the peace with Eritrea. I think also its decision on the dam has been an important task in order to develop the potential of Ethiopia. So all in all, I think the country has been doing immensely well. I think my suggestion would be to listen less to what the outside world for its own interests, is saying, and to worry more about what are your interests, what are your desires, what you can do in order to achieve your goals. Now, when it comes to the United States, just to give a very important point, has been engaged for the last 50 years with the Middle East on a continual basis. Every Secretary of State has been traveling on shuttle diplomacy for the last 50 years, back and forth. And the question that one can ask is, what has the United States really achieved for the development of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict? Actually, very little. Very little has been achieved in the 50 years of shuttle diplomacy. I think the United States has a lot of worries around the world. I don't think it should be involved in any way with the Ethiopian issue. I think Ethiopia is capable of doing its own needs. I think it is capable with the current government, elected, I repeat again, democratically by the vast majority of the people, to run its own course, to do the right thing, to prevent terrorism for being an integral part of the struggle of this country. And I am all confident that the current government in Addis Ababa is capable of doing all that, in spite of the criticism that it might receive from various quarters of the world.
Also, my final question, Ambassador Avi, refers to the critical issue which Ethiopia has to deal with, the media warfare. Coming along with these issues are, diplomatic maneuvers, fake alerts, urging international community to leave Addis Ababa, even if Addis Ababa is peaceful. The call for intervention in all types of media propaganda. The Ethiopian Defense Force, with the leadership of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, were able to reverse the attack and repel the terrorist groups. All these media corporates continue this campaign. Ambassador Avi, so in light of your diplomatic experience, what is your opinion on how friends and partners can help Ethiopia handle this and build lasting peace?
I have to admit that for us, it probably is the most difficult issue for the simple reason that we have been in Israel victims of very horrendous media reporting throughout the years. We have been victims of anti-Semitic approaches. We have been victims of negation of actually our right to exist. It is a very uphill and long battle to deal with the media. Very, very, very difficult. I have to admit that we have devoted a lot of efforts in trying to combat that kind of horrible media. Not very successfully, I have to admit, not very successfully. Much of the reasoning has to do with different bringings, different upbringing, different thinking, political considerations. If you see, for example, the demonstrations recently in London by Palestinians and their colleagues, British citizens who have absolutely no understanding, no knowledge of what the Middle East is, what the Palestinians want, what Israel is, and they all run in the streets proclaiming that Israel has to be punished. Those things are very, very, very difficult to encounter. I recommend what I've been recommending in Israel for a long time is to try and deal with the media but pay more attention to what we do, and what we do has to be the right thing. We have to work with the Palestinians, and we do that. We have to work with our neighbors, and we do that. Now we have the Abrahamic Accord with some of the Arab countries, and we have put tremendous efforts in that. I think what practically, eventually you do is much more important than what the media characterize you. And regrettably, as you rightly said, both Ethiopia and Israel have been for many years victims of that.
Finally, before we go, Ambassador Retta, what preparations should be made for the great diaspora homecoming challenge? And how is that going to work in Israel? What preparations have you been making?
Thank you very much. The homecoming challenge during the upcoming European year is a very important venture. We're putting in place a plan of action to facilitate the conditions for the community to travel to Ethiopia. And this is part of the call of our Prime Minister, His Excellency Dr. Abiy Ahmed, to mobilize Ethiopians in the diaspora to visit home during the Ethiopian holidays in January. Here in Israel, there are over 160,000 Ethiopian Israelis, and we anticipate that thousands will join us to visit their second home. And we have created community groups, and especially we will be focusing on, the second generation of Ethiopians, because, the first generation are well connected. They have been in Ethiopia. They would usually often visit Ethiopia once a year. And for the second generation who were born here, over half of this population are interested in going and visiting Ethiopia. In that connection, we have created a new program, Back to the Origin, and this homecoming challenge will be a new springboard to make sure that we can bring more and more people to visit their second home during this time. And I look forward for many of our fellow citizens to join us to come to Ethiopia during this time.
Well, Ambassador Retta and Ambassador Avi, thank you so much for your time, for your ideas.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Well, dear viewers, with that, we come to the end of today's program, and many thanks for your company so far. Until I see you next time with another program, it's goodbye from me. Bye-bye.